Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about encouraging collaboration. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was really good. I feel like I just had really a lot of the weirdness of parenting illustrated to me. So yeah, I find myself so last weekend the girls, they both had some money saved up from they got money as gifts for their birthdays. And so we had to go to a toy store to buy other people birthday presents, so they got to spend money. And it's this is the first time this has really happened where they're like, how much do I have, what can I get? It was a whole thing. But they both got, do you know what Tamagotchis are?
No.
They're these little egg things from I think the 90s used to have them, but there's an animal and you keep it alive by feeding it. You press one button and so
I do know those.
Yeah, and it's pretty benign in terms of computer game stuff. It's very low tech. But now I'm babysitting the Tamagotchi when they're in school so they don't die, because I don't think I could cope with the meltdown that would happen. So then, yeah, it's just ridiculous. So, and when we first got home from the store, my youngest completely melted down because she was like, it's just too demanding. It just wants too many things. And I was like, yeah, it does. Yeah, it's really hard to bear. So, yeah, so that was my completely ridiculous thing. In the car park in work, I was like, oh no, the Tamagotchi's hungry, and I was pressing all the buttons to try and feed it. So because one day I ignored it and then there was a very threatening skull on the screen. But I managed to bring it back to life anyway. Not something I ever thought I would be doing. So I was like, wow. And then this morning, do you remember you probably don't because you're younger, but there's a Bon Jovi song called Blaze of Glory.
Oh, I think I might, yeah.
Yeah, so it came on the radio and then the girls were like, what's this? What's this about? Why would anyone choose to... Anyway, so it was a long discussion about what the meaning was of the Blaze of Glory. But then this morning my youngest had a complete meltdown on the way into school. And I think I've shared on here before her love of pigs. So I ended up, me and her older sister, singing Blaze of Glory, but with lyrics replaced, so it was about her and pigs. And anyway, it was just one of the more ridiculous moments, all of these parents looking at me sympathetically because it was absolutely lashing rain and just trying to get this kid to go into school. Anyway, so she did go into school and she had a great time, but things I did not think I would be doing at this age of my life is playing with Tamagotchis and then that kind of nonsense. Anyway, how was your week?
Oh, it's so nice that the older sister was also singing and helping.
Oh, absolutely.
And, my week was good. My brother just went to Japan. He's been working on going to Japan for years, but they've been closed for COVID until just last week. And he went.
Fabulous.
And so he's on this epic adventure by himself, and it sounds really cool. And one thing that's really fun is I've been thinking so much about time zones, so you're in Ireland, which is 8 hours ahead. He's in Japan, which is 8 hours behind. And I'm thinking about both of those things, and so he's 8 hours behind, but I mean really it's 16 hours ahead if you think about the day of the week.
Oh man.
But if you don't care about the day of the week, it's very confusing. I don't know, I feel like I'm leveling up on my ability to think about time zones here. But it's been so fun to hear about him, getting train tickets and getting on the train and that kind of thing. And he's been so diligent about studying Japanese for years, and it seems like he's communicating in Japanese and ordering things and getting tickets and mailing things, and it's all working. So that's pretty darn cool.
That is super cool. I have to say, I haven't ever been that much of a traveler. I mean, I know, but to a culture that's completely different. Do you know what I mean? Because American culture is so familiar to all Irish people because all the TV and, and even just going around Europe is all pretty similar. So I haven't done anything that is completely different. But that's so cool. How long has he gone for?
Several weeks, almost a month, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
very
whole
cool
thing. Yeah.
Excellent.
So
okay.
I have
more about this.
Yeah.
Yes, tell us.
I have a quote for us today from Mark Twain, and I thought it related to working with other people. Nothing so needs reforming as other people's habits.
Oh my god. Well,
Oh,
absolutely.
my goodness. Isn't he
Yes.
just the best? He's so good.
That's so funny because it also relates. This week, my youngest, I realised that she really is like me. Because when she gets stressed, she just starts getting really like, why are you doing that over there? Like, she just starts kind of criticizing everyone else. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can see where that comes from. Yeah, she didn't catch that
That's
from
funny.
the wind. So, yeah. But yes, I heartily agree. That is the main problem.
And that's
Okay.
always such a thing when you're in groups. You're like, oh, but so-and-so's just so annoying or whatever, you know.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So
tell
what are
me-
we talking about
Yeah.
today?
So we're talking about encouraging collaboration. So how do we get students working together in the classroom and on the activities we want them to work on and not having a competitive environment?
Totally. And so I guess the first thing I wanted to throw out there is just classic grading on a curve is kind of...
Oh my God, yes. Okay,
was
sorry,
that what you were
that's-
going to bring up too?
Totally.
Yeah, so grading on a curve kind of inherently involves some collaboration, or competition. It kind of insists that there be some competition. And so I think it's much easier just fundamentally in the grading scheme to encourage collaboration if it's more of a percentage-based thing or specifications-based thing or whatever, as long as it's possible for however many people earn A's to get A's, that will just automatically kind of do more collaboration. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there to begin with. What do you
100%.
have to add to
Dude,
that?
I feel like we need to... No, not really, but I feel like we need to have... I don't even know, like, not really an episode because I don't think either of us grade on a curve, so I don't know what the episode would be, but just... What's the rationale behind... Like, I can maybe understand if you had a class of 1,000 people. No, I still don't get it. Because, like, either, you want them to know a thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't quite...
All right, well, I'll tell you the one time that I do grade on a curve, which is when my students take a standardized test, like it's the American Chemical Society's analytical chemistry exam, and I want them to take it so that I can compare my class with some national standards so that I can say they got 75th percentile on this national standardized test in the recommendation letters. So there's all these reasons I want them to take it. But if you just go raw percentages on the exam, it's gonna... It doesn't correspond with percentages that I would normally have my students do. It would be much lower. Like a 50% on that exam is actually quite good. So I do want to scale it up somehow. And usually what I end up doing is scaling it up, not necessarily so the highest scorer gets 100, but trying to make the average or the distribution of grades from that exam kind of roughly match my normal exams. So maybe that's not exactly grading on a curve. I'm not demanding a certain number of C's and B's, but I am shifting it to an expectation that I already have,
Okay, so now I'm just being ridiculous, because I have done that for sure, and being like, oh, yeah, I made that test too hard or whatever.
Oh, sure,
but I think
yeah.
I have worked in other institutions where it's like there is a number of A's, there is a number of B's, and like that, I think, like you said, really does encourage competition. And why would you help anyone out? If you want
There's
to,
only 5
like,
A's. Yeah.
Totally. Like you're going to do what you need to do to get it. So yes, absolutely. And I think...
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's something I explicitly say on the first day, and it's never ever turned out to be true. But in theory, if every single person gets an A, we'll just be happy and delighted that everyone got an A. The end. Do you know what I mean? And I think it does seem like that has a bit of an impact.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think so.
Yeah.
So that sounds like it's working for you. Do you have other things that are working for you with fostering collaboration?
Yeah, I guess one thing I was wondering, what does good collaboration look like to you? Do you know what I mean? So, like, I think for me, I feel like it's, I don't know, like sometimes I'm like, I really like seeing people making sure that everybody is on board before you move on, like really all of that kind of stuff. Like, I really like seeing, like, everybody take it, like, it's just so great when you get to a situation where it's not always the one person who's explaining stuff. Do you know what I mean? And it is kind of rotating around. And I definitely know what I don't like. Do you know what I mean? So, like, even if people are being super pleasant to each other, but one person does all of the work and the other people just copy it, that is definitely not what I want to be seeing.
Okay, so that's interesting. So good group work to you involves everybody contributing and, like, everyone being on the same page before we move on to the next problem and that. So it's really, that's really a group kind of mindset.
Yeah, and like I've seen things before, because sometimes there just is a person in the group who is ahead or like has done this sort of stuff before, whatever it is. And like a perfect situation to me is someone just saying, no, hang on, I really want to understand how to do this. Can you explain it again? Or so, like, you know what I mean? So just, it's, the worst thing for me is someone just passively, like, even if the one person is always the person who gets it first and is always explaining it, like, I think I'm okay with that. But as long as, I know that's not what I said 2 minutes ago, but
No,
like
okay,
evolving as I'm going along. But as long as someone is not just passively taking in the information.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So as long as people, the group dynamic is such that they're comfortable saying, hold on, I want to understand that, then you're okay with it. I like that. Yeah. That seems like a very functional, positive, effective group that you're describing.
So what about for you? Because it feels like for you, you have both the group working class, but then you always have these like very involved labs. So what does that kind of look like for you?
So the labs are what's working for me. They're my favorite example of collaboration working really well. And I feel like it kind of forms organically. So the labs are twice a week for 3 hours a week. Each student is in lab with the same other students who are in lab. So that's a lot of time that they're together, and they're at their own station. They're doing their own experiment. Like, usually everyone else is doing the same experiment, but everyone's in charge of their own chemicals, their own equipment, their own results.
Oh, and so there's not lab partners.
There's not lab partners. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. So there's independent work, but they're spending lots of time in the same place, working on the same project with the same people. And just organically, spontaneously, lively communication and idea exchange and asking for input happens because somebody makes a mistake and someone says, oh, maybe you want to try this, or I made that mistake too, here's what I did. Or someone says, oh gosh, what do you do? Is this what it should look like? And someone says, well, this is what mine looked like. And it just very quickly gets to a point, everybody you're together for a long time, you're going to have some casual conversations on the side, and then that kind of lays some groundwork where you're comfortable chatting with each other. You're all doing the same thing. It leads to lots of exchange of ideas about the actual thing you're doing. And I think, like, for sure, 100%, the students are learning more from being with each other than they would if it was just one individual doing the exact same experiments in a room by themselves. Somebody thinks of, oh, this would be a much easier way to transfer these solutions. And then everyone says, oh, let me do it that way. That's a great idea. Or, something like that. You see somebody rinse out the flask 3 times, you're like, oh, why are you doing that? That's a good idea. I do need to transfer that whole solution over. I'll rinse it out 3 times. Or, whatever it is. Yeah. So I love hearing the chitter-chatter of them exchanging their ideas, asking input. And they come ask me too. But oftentimes I'm just kind of eavesdropping from the other room. And as long as the chatter's going in good directions, I let it continue separately, and they can come confirm with me if they want to. Anyway, so yeah, that's just like the right ingredients for collaboration. I think it involves that they're all doing it. They all are doing it. They all have to do the experiment, but they also have a lot of time together to fill with whatever they want to chat about while they're doing it. I think that kind of helps too.
Oh, yeah. That sounds very cool. And it's making me think about, for my labs, maybe it's not even in my working on, but I really struggle with that, like trying to get the kind of collaborative spirit. I think, at times too, I've tried to enforce it with like previous times I would have like a lab quiz and I'd be like, you better know how to do this because you're going to, you know what I mean? And it's so hard, but that just sounds lovely. I love the idea actually of like, it's individual experiments. Like everyone has to do their own work. So even if someone literally is just like, I'm just going to do everything Bob does over there,
right?
They still have to do it. So
they're still observing what Bob's doing. They're still copying. They're learning a whole lot by observing what Bob's doing. And if Bob makes a mistake, then they're like, crap, I shouldn't do that. Whatever it is. So yeah, I think that's great.
And that's why I think it's interesting what you're saying, because it's like this peer instruction. Because if you came out and you were like, listen, everyone, you have to rinse it 3 times, everyone would be like, okay, but there's no critical critical thinking there. But if they're like, is Bob right? Do I need to
Yeah.
rinse it 3 times? Or like there's a little more like, so I think
Right.
that's super
That's a good
cool
point.
too.
And you're sitting there, you're rinsing it 3 times. You're like, do you really need to rinse it 3 times? You like maybe even just say that out loud. And someone's like, oh, let's think about that. And you have a little chat. Do we need to rinse it
Yeah.
3 times? Maybe we don't, you know? Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So I'm working on transitioning some of those things to my other things that aren't working as well. But first, what's not working for you?
Well, I just,
What are you
one more
working
thing
on?
that kind of did
Yeah.
work for me
Oh,
is
great.
like, you know, I think I've talked on here before, and I haven't done it recently, and I found it hard. Before the pandemic, I did this whole norm building exercise at the beginning of class. And so I think like it was like partly they introduced themselves beforehand, then I do like a lecture about how, you know, no smirking and no, you know, whatever, and we're all going to be respectful. Smirking feels like the worst thing that can happen to like a classroom community. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, we had that, and then I had the thing where like everybody would make suggestions on their whiteboards of stuff they want. And the number one thing that people would say is like, please be patient. I'm really nervous, you know, all that stuff. And it just kind of, I think that really helped when we got
That
into
makes
groups
sense.
then.
That makes
That it's
sense.
just not going to be tolerated, because we all know I had the terrible Dementor class where it went exactly the opposite way. And there was a lot of smirking and a lot of like snickering at people's questions. And that was, yeah, anyway. So I think the norm building at the beginning does kind of help. And then I think there is like, because when you're saying all of this and you're describing how your students talk to each other, it just sounds adorable and lovely. But then you're super lovely in all of your interactions with students, and you would never be like, what do you mean, do you rinse it 3 times? Of course you, like, whatever. So like, I think it really comes from the top down too, that I think if you were a person who was smirking and like acting like someone asked a stupid question, I think that would very rapidly
would
translate
propagate.
into the smaller interactions in the classroom. So
I'm sure you're right. And I do try to, like, if someone says, oh, this maybe is a stupid question or whatever, I try to say, oh, I don't think it's a stupid question. Like, let's think it through really thoroughly. And, you know, and I think you're right. If I'm in the lab and something's coming up where it's like, oh, that might be a stupid question or a stupid thought, or why haven't you thought this through yet? I try to explain the complexity of whatever it is to suggest that, well, there is a lot to think about here, actually. And I really like what you're saying about if we get it on the table early on that a lot of people would like patience and would like to go slow, then it's like, oh, it's not just me. And that would make it a lot more comfortable. So all of this is to reinforce this community where we think about things and try to, you know, go through these complex issues thoughtfully with everyone's ideas instead of expect that we all just know this one answer, which if we all just did know this one answer, it probably wouldn't be as depth, as we wouldn't know it in as depth,
yes.
You know? Yeah.
Well, and one other thing that like, what am I trying to say? The other thing that I do say, and I don't know if this is effective, so I'm putting it right in between working and working on, but is like about collaboration in terms of like homework help and when does it veer into cheating and like
yes, sure.
that kind of thing. And so someone told me this once, and I think it's held up in my head, but like if you have a discussion with someone about how to do something, that's collaboration. But if you're ever transcribing something they have written, then you're veering into something else. Do you know what I mean? And like, it seems like a really like facile, like juvenile kind of example. But I was like, the more I've thought about it, I'm like, that is kind of true. So if someone's like, hey, you know the way like when you're using the kinematic equations, you do blah, blah, blah. That feels so different than showing someone what you have written down and they're just copying it out. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that's something someone told me, and I've said it to students, like if you're having a discussion about how to do a problem, you're probably in safe territory. But once you're getting into they're just showing you the work and you're writing it down, then that's more problematic. So just kind of, because what's the line sometimes between collaborating and
Sure. Yeah, that's tricky. Yeah, and it makes me think again about lab, because in lab everybody has different data.
Yeah.
But the calculations are often pretty much the same. And so you could... I normally don't think about it this way. I think if you're together and you're like, okay, so we're going to take the volume that we added of this solution and we know its concentration, so then we can figure out how many moles of whatever it is we added. that seems fine. I even don't mind if people are writing that on the board trying to figure that out together, you know?
I think to me too, like there's definitely been times where I think the other thing I try and say to students, like if you've already started the problem, because to me sometimes when you're stuck on a problem and then someone does show you, you're like, oh, there it is. Yes, I get it. I see.
Right,
and that's very different than, I haven't even started this. I'm just transcribing what you were. Like it's kind of, it's tricky.
I mean, I really do not approve. I would not, like the thing is, I see what you're saying about this. If we're having a discussion, that's totally fine. Of course, that's totally fine. I completely agree. If you're actually writing stuff out and copying it, that's not fine. Maybe I agree, but I really don't like that kind of creates this line of like, I'll tell you how to solve the problem, but I won't like show you the actual calculations. Oh, totally. I'm going to hold my notes in front of me and just tell you what I, like, no, we should be going through it. Right. Like if I understand how to do this problem, then I want to tell you how to do the problem.
I think the scenario I'm imagining in my head is if you're like, give me your homework and I just give you my 5 problems and you write them out. So I think that's
the thinking.
Yeah.
Like if you're just copying, you're not thinking. If you're saying, wait, how did you do this? Write it out for me. That's okay, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's so, anyway, okay. I think we have much more to think about that. I don't think I can make a hard
I hadn't even thought about.
It's so weird because you're like, I'll know it when I see it. That's basically like when I see it. But so will I tell you my working on?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, so I have 3 things here. So one is, and this is a little bit more kind of veering into group work situations, but what do you do when you have a genuine solo person? Like sometimes people just really do like to be an individual learner. And I think when I was first learning about group learning and how beneficial it could be, I was like, okay, great. So individual learners are bad. And then the instructor of the class was like, no. Some people are also individual learners. It's just that they've been only catered to for a long time, like that style of learning, and we want to introduce some group learning, whatever, for other people, but we can't discount that. And I've definitely had people in the class who are just like, it's just so uncomfortable and unpleasant for them. And like, I know there is an element of you need to learn how to do this, but it's just not happening. So I don't know whether to like push people or just leave them alone. And sometimes it's someone's just a little bit reticent and a bit shy. And then once they get over that, they have a great time and it's really beneficial. Other times it's like actually pulling teeth for the entire semester. So I just there was one time I definitely just let the person, they just did their own thing and they were happy and it was fine. So it's sort of that I struggle a little bit with. Just when to kind of force it. Do you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. Because the way I think about it is, there's different learning styles. And some people do better learning solo. And some people do better learning groups. And some people, I don't know, some combination, whatever. And that's why we have these different learning styles in our classes, is to try to reach a variety of learning style people. Now, that said, I think there's also value in learning how to learn in whatever way is not as natural for you. 100%. You know, like, so maybe you're great at learning in groups, but it would be actually nice if you could learn by yourself sometime because maybe you want to. Or maybe you're the awesome solo person, but you're going to have to work in a group at some point. And so it'd be good to have some practice learning how to do it. So, so these are all the balancing forces at play here. And I that's a good question. Like, what's our role? Is it really my position to say, you must learn how, this is a group assignment, and so you're going to practice, and this is the benefit to you because you're going to, at some point, maybe have to work with groups, and this will be one of those moments where you practiced it? Is that what I'm trying to teach in my class? I've come to the conclusion, yes, if it's a group assignment, you just have to do it as a group, and that's how it is. And I think, like, a lot of my group things come from the lab, where we only have so many pieces of equipment, and so we're going to work in groups, and that's literally just the only way that we're going to have everybody work with this equipment. So then I have this practical reason behind it, but I do apply it as well to when they're working on groups in class, when they could work solo in all practicality. But that's actually what I'm working on too, is most groups in my classrooms work great, but then there's the groups where there's one person either who just really prefers to work independently, or one person who's just really anxious about working in a group and showing that they don't know something already, and they just really it's not really working for them to work in a group. And I'm not sure, yeah, like you say, sometimes you insist they work in a group and it ends up they push through some block and everything's great, and other times it's just the whole semester it's not really working, and maybe it would have been better if they weren't in a group. So that is interesting. I agree.
Yeah. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah. So you've sometimes just said, okay, you can work independently, and
well, this time okay. It just happened organically because it was just like the effort of trying to put this person in a group. Mm-hmm. It just was like, I don't know, entropy. Like they just constantly just moved away, and like it just couldn't. It was like, okay, fine, you do whatever you want to do, and then it wasn't necessarily like a deliberate strategy. It was just like, okay, whatever, this isn't working. So there was that, and the other thing, like, that I really struggled with then. So, you know, in your labs, right, and you had this nice collaboration, can they stand wherever they want or be at wherever, or do you put them in particular spots?
Well, see, that's the other beauty of the lab, is that they have a drawer with equipment that's theirs. So they're going to stand next to that drawer, and they've got some bench space next to that drawer, and they can go, you know, use some shared equipment down the hall and then come back, but this is their spot with their stuff. So again, we've got this practical reason behind it where they must stand in this spot. So I'm not assigning seats. They can choose whatever bench they want to when they come in, but that's where they're going to be the whole semester.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's something like I think I talked about before too. Like there was such a lovely spirit of collaboration in my like activity tutorial sections and labs. But again, they would sort of self-select where they were going to go, and somehow they would just blob up into like similar groups, and it might not be similar like experience or content knowledge, but just similar approaches and whatever. And you know, at times I've had groups that were kind of competitive, but that kind of worked for them. Like the three boys who were like super like, well, I can, you know, and they like that kind of
right. There's nothing wrong with the competitive thing as long as we're all on board. That's what we're doing. That's great.
Totally. So that was fine. And then that's something I really struggled with then with Zoom and having artificial groups. And there was no way for someone to overhear that they may actually prefer to sit on that other table. And I like, you know, like I did do something last year, which kind of was effective medium, but it was like, here are 6 breakout rooms. Like, tell me how confident you feel about the material we just did. And then you go into room 1 is, I really just don't know what's going on at all. And room 6 is, you know, and it was really interesting, but all of the people who always went into room 6 never collaborated and just zipped through the problems together. Like they were in there together.
I guess that makes sense. Would they at least check like, oh, this is kind of a tricky one. Is this the way you're approaching it, or would they just blast through all the problems?
Sometimes there's a little bit of that, but mostly blasting through. So, and then like it was the number 1, everyone would discuss every single bit of it, and so that was kind of good-ish in a way of like selecting. It didn't quite get at what I was trying to have, like the magic of the classroom, where they just sort of, because it's not necessarily confidence level that seemed to work in groups. But anyway, that was helpful with the Zoom thing.
Okay, then, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go.
This is fascinating because, the things that I've been struggling on with my group work in my class, I put them in groups. I assign the groups, and the idea behind that is so that everybody is in a group. There's no people being left out. There's, it's just, this is your group that you're working with. And I you try to form a mixed group so that, I don't know, you don't augment any minoritization issues or something like that. You try to, so anyway, I would form my own groups. And then we'd work in the groups all day for a few lectures, a quarter of my lectures, we would have group work days. And, I struggled sometimes where some students, all the things we've talked about, they either really are confident about the material and just want to zip through it themselves, or they don't want to work in the group for whatever reason. And sometimes students just say, oh, if we're just doing a group day, I'm going to leave. Yeah. That kind of thing. So I was trying to figure out what to do, and a lot of the advice I've been getting is kind of pushing towards more structure. Like, let's have the groups, they'll sit in the groups the whole semester, even when we're not doing a group work day, or assign somebody to be secretary and have it rotate
that's
around.
What I was, yeah.
Interesting. Or or have some product. Like, I don't have these be graded things. I really like it being a low stakes practice learning kind of thing. So I don't have it be graded, but we could have it be graded. That would make me maybe insist that the groups work better together. So that's one direction I could go.
See, okay, sorry to go sideways on you, but that's what I struggle with. But if it's a graded thing, I feel like that's just going to give rise to like, well, listen, like Sophie knows what she's doing, so let's just get out of her way and let her get it today.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And so
just let Sophie take it, and then we'll all exactly. So
okay,
I'm pretty set in not grading these group work things. So I guess what I'm discussing is, I could go towards more structure, like having a secretary, having them sit together all the time, having them whatever. Or I could go less structure, actually. And you're saying you have really enjoyed the groups kind of forming organically, and that's actually formed kind of more groups that work better together, actually. And so I'm wondering if, even though there's all these really good reasons for choosing the groups, maybe there's also really good reasons for letting them form organically and just having a bunch of tables.
Do you know what my third thing here is?
Yeah, tell me.
My third thing is the roles, and like doing that where you have it more structured. Mm-hmm. And I'm like always wondering, should I try and do that? Mm-hmm. Like, I guess my resistance. So I think, what am I trying to say? The things that worked for me have worked like really, really well in classes where I kind of have a feeling no matter what I did, it would have worked well, because they just were like, you know what I mean? And times when it's been really bad, I think it may have just been really bad no matter what I did. So there is a little bit of that.
Sure.
And it's really small classes. But I think there is something, the thing that freaks me out about having the assigned groups is, what if there's problems? Do you know what I mean? And then if you have to come in and be like, well, we're all like, every day my girls come home and I'm like, oh, you know, what happened in school today? And they're like, well, so-and-so was moved from our table because they couldn't stop talking. Oh. But you know, you come in and you're like, okay, we're going to just move. John has to clearly move to this other group because he can't get along with, you know, whatever. And so that makes me really anxious, like having to navigate that aspect. And then the roles thing, like I've seen other people do it beautifully and had it really, really work, but I just resist it, and I don't totally know why.
I resist it too. I really feel like I'm not trying to impose weird false structures, you know? Yeah. What works great, I love, like in lecture when we're having like back and forth, I'm like writing some stuff, they're doing things, we're going back and forth, and I just say, chat with your neighbor about this and see what you think. That works great.
Yeah.
You know, and even the quiet person who maybe you would wish would talk, they're listening to the people around, and maybe they will say something, you know? So, like, I don't mind, you know, so there's that. And then there's also, like, in the lab, where it is working pretty well, I feel like I haven't established any of these weird roles. They kind of, because of all these practical things that insist that we must be in groups and we must work together, there's less resistance to working together, kind of. And so rather than establish false things that insist they work together, I'd rather just let it happen more I don't know, that's where I'm feeling right now. I know that there's lots of research for how to make the best group and how to assign the best roles, and I'm sure that works great, but I feel some resistance to it myself.
I do too, and I think, like, partly, like, and one of the motivations for the roles thing, right, is like an equity sort of thing. And like, if there's one like rowdy person, you know, they have to take turns. I guess one thing, I have been in a classroom where that was the situation. I was a teaching assistant. And especially at that time, I just didn't have like the motivation or the skill set to really police that and be like, okay, Sophie was talking, so John, you're not actually, you know, you're the person who's writing at the moment. Like, that's kind of exhausting, and it just sort of, I think if you can do it and you have those skill sets, great, but that sort of, it just became a whole other thing that you had to do. And then the other thing is, and I'm saying this, and again, as I've just contradicted myself about 15 times this episode.
That's okay, it's complicated.
But like, sometimes too, not everybody is everything. So sometimes the roles thing kind of speaks to me as if we all have an inner, do you know what, and we might not, do you know what I mean? Like, maybe, you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's, like what, I guess I don't see the problem if this particular foursome decides that so-and-so is really, really excellent at doing X and will do that. I mean, there's going to be other groups with other dynamics, and so-and-so is not relegated to always doing X forever for their whole life, I don't think. I don't know. I mean, on the other hand,
epiphany.
I can see that we want them to practice the different roles and not get pigeonholed really early. Yeah.
Having an epiphany.
Oh, great. What is it?
Okay. My epiphany is that maybe I don't see the need for the roles as such because the classes that have worked for me have been really small and I really knew everybody. Do you know what I mean? And I really had a sense of, okay, so-and-so is just slacking and they're not contributing and I'm going to try and draw them into the conversation or whatever. And maybe the roles thing really works in a larger classroom setting where you just don't have the time to really get into, like, why is Jack never saying anything or whatever, you know what I mean? And it's like impossible to kind of, or like if it's a graduate teaching assistant or whatever and they just can't, you know, they don't interact with these students enough. Because that was like the beautiful thing about where we worked. Like once the beautiful semester where everything was great, I had 17 people in the class and we had lectures 3 times a week. We had an activity and we had labs. You know what I mean? Like we spent over 10 hours a week together. So you really knew everyone and I had a real sense of everybody's participation levels. But I'm sure that's not transferable to a larger situation. So maybe that's where the roles, So maybe it's okay that we don't want to do the roles because we don't necessarily have to, but maybe
they could be a useful tool in some situations, but maybe not a tool that we need in this situation. I do feel like, you're right. Like in the lab, I have a group working together and one of them might ask me for some glassware and I go get it. And I might pointedly give it to someone else in the group. Someone who maybe has been kind of not hanging back and isn't really sure what to do or something. I give them the glassware thinking, okay, now you've got the glassware. Now you're going to go. I'm trying to enable them and make it clear that I see them as a fully fledged group member.
Okay.
But I can only do that if I'm working with, I always have less than 20 students. That's a good point.
Okay, cool. Well, it sounds like we solved it then.
I guess it's solved. Great. Group work, collaboration, check.
Excellent.
Thanks for the discussion. It's so good to reflect on these things.
I know, it was super interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of meat in there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us and we'll see you next time.